Good afternoon, Chairman Schwartner, members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Walker, and I'm the Deputy Director of the National Wildlife Federation's Texas Coast and Water Program. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today about TCEQ. We strongly support recommendation 3.1 in the staff report, and I'd like to suggest some refinements to make it more effective. First, the recommendation should be expanded to provide a mechanism for assisting the Environmental Flows Advisory Group in evaluating approaches for administration and enforcement of water rights and for encouraging voluntary conversions of existing water rights for flow purposes. This is a statutory directive that has gone unfulfilled. It is not realistic to expect the members of the Environmental Flows Advisory Group to develop those types of recommendations on their own. To that end, we suggest directing the creation of an advisory panel of experts on environmental flows management. With this in place, the Environmental Flows Advisory Group would have access to the expertise needed for development of various options for flow protection. Second, we support the recommendation that the Environmental Flows Advisory Group prepare a biennial statewide work plan. As noted in the report, the biennial work plan would provide a mechanism for prioritizing and scheduling needed activities. However, the Science Advisory Committee, rather than the TCEQ, would be the entity best situated to compile work plans for consideration by the Environmental Flows Advisory Group. The Scientific Advisory Committee members are technical experts, and this activity is consistent with the committee's current directives to advise the Environmental Flows Advisory Group to provide recommendations for environmental flows programs at TCEQ, the Water Development Board, and Parks and Wildlife. TCEQ has limited expertise regarding environmental flow studies, making it more important for the agencies to submit proposed content to the Scientific Advisory Committee for consideration in developing draft work plans. And that is my comments, and we'll visit with you all after this about them more.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Schwertner, Vice Chairman Holland, and members of the Sunset Commission. My name is Alex Ortiz, and I'm the Water Resources Specialist for the Lone Star chapter of the Sierra Club. I want to take some time to thank y'all for entertaining a long day of public testimony and also express my gratitude to the Sunset staff for the remarkable job that they've done. I also want to echo many of the comments that are going to be made, especially from our Texas Living Waters partners, the Hill Country Alliance, and National Wildlife Federation. I want to take some time to highlight specific issues to TCEQ's water quality programs that the current recommendations would not address in any way. The first is the Total Maximum Daily Load program. Section 303D of the Clean Water Act requires states to create and maintain a list of impaired waters and subsequently plan for those waters' remediation through implementation of a Total Maximum Daily Load, or TMDL. That TMDL describes a permissible amount of pollution for already impaired waters, and impairments can range from impaired dissolved oxygen levels, which might harm wildlife, to an impairment for bacterial pollution or mercury contamination in fish, which is a risk to human health. There are waters on the 303D list that have been on the list for 1 to 2 decades without any clear progress on the development of TMDLs. In addition to there being an outstanding backlog of TMDL projects, there's no clarity on how TCEQ prioritizes which TMDL project it will actually take up next. The Sierra Club suggests 3 clear recommendations that might solve this issue, including auditing the effectiveness of the program, being required to develop appropriate priority setting criteria, and being required by statute to develop those in a timely manner. Secondly, as some of you may know, TCEQ is currently in the middle of its triennial review of the surface water quality standards, and I just want to point out that the surface water quality standards are very frequently piecemeals of standards from, a decade and a half ago. So it's really important that TCEQ be consistently required to update those standards and obtain EPA compliance.
Thank you for coming.
Just for time.
Sure. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Myron Hess. I'm here testifying on behalf of myself and the National Wildlife Federation. I've also submitted written testimony, and we only touch now on a few highlights. I've been working on water right issues in Texas since the late 1980s, not 1880s. It just seems that long. And have been heavily involved throughout the development and implementation of the environmental flow protection aspects of Senate Bill 3 from 2007. Protecting river flows and freshwater inflows to bays and estuaries is critical to our Texas natural heritage including the economically important recreational and commercial fishing, hunting, and tourism activities that depend on healthy aquatic systems. We strongly support recommendation 3.1 in the staff report for re-energizing the adaptive management aspects of Senate Bill 3 and have suggested some refinements to make that recommendation more effective. SB 3 relies heavily on bay and basin area stakeholder committees and expert science teams. The recommendation appears to contemplate abolishing those individual groups and then recreating them on a 10-year cycle as basin and bay-specific flow standards are considered for revision. Doing that would result in a loss of the lessons learned in those groups and would impair work needed on an ongoing basis to identify regionally appropriate studies and monitoring, as well as non-regulatory affirmative strategies for helping to meet flow needs at a local level. Although the level of activity would vary at different points in the 10-year review cycle, those groups should continue in existence so that knowledge can be shared as vacancies are filled over time, and so that local perspectives on study and monitoring activities and affirmative strategies for flow protection are considered on an ongoing basis. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Austin.
And one quick question. This advisory group, and I don't want to categorize this one with the other ones, but is this really a check-the-box group, or do you really provide meaningful input?
I think very meaningful input. The stakeholder committees, for example, actually developed specific recommendations for the flow standards that should be adopted. TCQ then evaluated those flow standards. And then there's an expert science team that also provided scientific input. So very substantive input.
But is that not something the staff could do, or do you really need the advisory committee?
I think the advisory committee performed a critical function. I mean, it's sort of one of the fundamental aspects of Senate Bill 3. This was a very negotiated process saying, let's have this local input on sort of regional levels, and then TCQ would look at that local input and say what works for the state, but not just do it on a statewide level.
Okay.
So that's a very fundamental aspect of the approach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the Sunset Advisory Commission. I am Catherine Romans, the Executive Director of the Hill Country Alliance. I want to thank you for your work on this commission. I also want to thank the commission's staff for their hard work in putting together the staff report on the TCEQ. We joined a number of our partner organizations, including the Texas Living Waters Project, in submitting written comments. We also have worked closely with the Texans for Responsible Aggregate Mining. You've heard, as you've seen, heard, and will continue to hear over the course of the next several hours, the work of the TCEQ impacts the lives of tens of thousands of Texans every day. You've also heard some fundamental concerns around the authority or lack thereof for the TCEQ to satisfactorily protect our state's public health and natural resources. The Hill Country is one of those regions that is facing the challenge of the rate of growth pushing against the lack of reasonable county authority. In the Hill Country, we are increasingly seeing our pristine rivers and creeks impacted by wastewater effluent. We were encouraged by the recognition from each of the TCEQ commissioners that we have an issue. The current permitting process is not protective of pristine streams. This is an economic issue and a property rights issue. This TCEQ should be directed to address this issue in the few pristine rivers left in the state. We share the concerns that have already been raised about the recommendation 3.3 calling for the cancellation of water rights after 10 years of non-use. Although we do see an opportunity for the TCEQ to work with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department to identify rights that could be encouraged for placement in the Texas Water Trust. Finally, monitoring and enforcement of permit violations is a fundamental part of the TCEQ's regulatory function, and the agency needs the ability to raise fines and put in place more monitoring equipment. Thank you very much for listening to our testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Schwartner, Vice Chair Holland, and members of the Commission. My name is Danielle Goshen, and I'm the Policy Specialist/Counsel for National Wildlife Federation here in Texas. We are a member of the Texas Living Waters Project and fully support our partners' comments here today made by Hill Country Alliance and the Sierra Club. I'm here to recommend that state agency participation in TCEQ contested case hearing process be brought up as an additional sunset issue. In 2011 TCEQ Sunset Bill, the legislature adopted a House floor amendment prohibiting state agencies like the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department from contesting any TCEQ permit, except when the agency is the applicant. Notably, this is at odds with a 2009 TPWD Sunset Review that recognized the agency's important role in providing comments on projects and permits, in addition to its right to participate in the hearings. This change greatly limited the ability of TPWD and other state agencies to provide their perspective on permitting decisions. This is harmful because agencies like TPWD often have specific expertise on our natural resources and what impacts could occur from agency action. Many of these decisions have the potential to adversely affect water quality or quantity and can impact the state's public property like state parks and wildlife management areas. As our water resources become more strained in this state, it is vitally important to have those individuals with the greatest knowledge participating. When there's a contested case hearing, only parties are allowed to present evidence, engage in discovery, cross-examine witnesses, and provide legal argument about what is required to comply with applicable law. The TCEQ commissioners are then required to base final agency action solely on the evidence that was provided during the case, which now occurs without the benefit of the expertise of TPWD and other state agencies to inform the complex decisions the commissioners are then required to make. Luckily, there's an easy solution. We believe that restoring the state agency's abilities to participate in TCEQ permitting actions could be done by simply removing the 2011 language added to Section 5.115 of the Texas Water Code. Thank you so much.